What would you do if someone across the street from you was involved in a crime? ABC's Will Trent is returning with a new season and more cases, and you'll be surprised at every unexpected turn. Special Agent Will Trent has the highest clearing rate in the GBI. That's the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and that's because he can see through a crime scene unlike any other agent. I'm still amazed at how he's using his past to solve these cases and make sure no one else gets left behind. These cases get really personal too. Season 1 finished with Will finding out that a serial killer was really his estranged father. In the new season, Will and his partners are back with more comedy, drama, and mysteries that I am so excited to see unfold. Is there more to the story with Will's father, and is Angie finally safe? All of this is based off Karen Slaughter's best-selling crime drama, and with an incredible cast and the release coming in just a few days, you guys have to let me know what you think. As a true crime fan, I'm so excited because the cases in this series are anything but open and shut. Tune into the premiere of Will Trent on ABC this Tuesday at 8/7 Central and stream on Hulu. Two boys have tragically been found dead, and their mother claims it was all an accident. Last Wednesday morning, a neighbor of the family in Shepherdsville heard 4 gunshots in about 30 seconds. He came over to see what was going on and found Tiffany collapsed in their front yard, screaming for help. As we know, when police got to the scene around 11, they found her 6 and 9-year-olds in bed, barely alive and suffering from gunshot wounds to the head. They were rushed to the hospital, but tragically, they each died in surgery later that day. Right now, the 32-year-old is being held on a $2 million bond and is indicating that this was an accident with a gun left in the bedroom. However, that neighbor says he heard her tell police that she was in such a bad spot and, quote, would never do anything like this unless someone manipulated her. With that, Tiffany's friends have said that she treated her kids like kings, but that outside of being a mother had a much darker side. Reportedly one where she gets mad really fast and it's like she flips like a switch. So right now, a motive does remain unclear, but we also know Tiffany's family has called CPS repeatedly about her parenting. Authorities say she has served time in prison for drug possession, but that there's nothing in her criminal history that suggests she'd be prone to violence. And they will really only say, quote, whether you think it's mental illness, just pure evil, a combination of both, it could be substance abuse. Pick your poison, none of it is good. The result is horrific.
Boys! Peanut! What? That's for me? Yeah. What else for me? This is for me too? Ooh. Open it. Okay. Okay, they got the chopsticks. Okay.
A 19-year-old's body has been scattered across the Milwaukee area after she went on a first date. Last Monday night, Shade told her building secretary about how she was so excited to go out for seafood with 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson. She never returned home, and when she missed her shift the next day, everyone knew that something was wrong. Now, when police looked at Shade's phone records, they found the pair went to Twisted Fisherman around 5 p.m., and then they actually went out for drinks and went back to Maxwell's house. You can see it was 12:45 when her phone left that residence and started pinging at local parks. Shade's work actually closed for the next 3 days to search for her, as investigators began to find a disturbing trail of evidence. On Tuesday morning, Shade's car was found burnt in an alley at 30th and Lisbon Street. Inside the vehicle, there was her clothing and part of her iPhone, and in the surrounding area, there was reportedly human flesh and a foot. Then, later that same afternoon, a passerby, quote, found a leg that had been sawn off at the hip down a bluff at Ornament Park. Over the next 2 days, more partial remains were found in the area, and tragically some of those have already been determined to be Shade. Now from here, using phone records and surveillance footage, police quickly determined that they were looking for Maxwell. They actually had video of him taking the bus after lighting Shade's car on fire, and they found blood and canisters of gasoline at his house. He was ultimately pulled over on the morning of April 4th and charged with first-degree murder, mutilating a corpse, and arson. Now, aside from that, we know Maxwell's neighbors have described him as keeping a low profile and occasionally seen walking his dogs. He's worked at several bars in the area where he's been described as a good coworker, well-liked, and not the type to do this. He also does have a criminal history, which consists of disorderly conduct and domestic violence charges. In one of these cases, he destroyed the property of 2 of his relatives, and in the other, he beat a man on Milwaukee Street. As of today, Maxwell is being held on a $5 million bond, as police continue to search and try to figure out what happened. And as for Shade, she graduated high school a semester early and was about to graduate with an associate's in criminal justice. Community members have said, quote, it could have been any one of our daughters. She was just going on a date. Who could have expected it to end like this? Everyone should know about what's happened to 22-year-old Laken Riley. Laken was a junior nursing student, and on Thursday morning, she alone went for a run near UGA's intramural fields. She never returned home, and her roommate called police concerned at 12:07 p.m. As we know, within 30 minutes of that call, police tragically found Laken's body in a wooded area near the pedestrian loop. This video shows you just how close she was to the trail, with paramedics saying she, quote, was unconscious and not breathing and had received visible injuries. Paramedics reportedly tried to give her CPR, but it was too late, and an autopsy has ruled her death a homicide by blunt force trauma to the head. Now, on Friday, all classes at UGA were canceled, and investigators focused in on an apartment that backs up to the trails where Laken was found. And they've said it was a multitude of evidence that led them there, and they went on to place 26-year-old Jose Ibarra under arrest. Again, as we know, Jose didn't know Laken, and police believe he, quote, woke up that day with bad intentions. He, his brother, his wife, and her child all actually illegally crossed the border in September of 2022, where they were met by border security and processed for immediate removal. They then, quote, claimed reasonable fear of returning to Venezuela and were released into the U.S. on parole due to lack of detention space. Now, from here, we know Jose and his family made their way up to New York, but the couple actually split this past November after he was arrested for endangering the welfare of their 5-year-old. This time, the NYPD reportedly released him before a detainer could be issued, and he moved down to Georgia to live in that apartment with his brother. He was arrested several more times there over the past few months, and his brother was caught a few weeks ago presenting a fake green card to UGA. He was trying to provide identification to work at the dining hall, but was reportedly fired before he ever got paid. Today, Jose is being held on murder charges, and his brother is being held on fraud charges. Jose's wife says that she only married him to help build their asylum cases, but that she doesn't think he's capable of physical violence. She thinks that there could be a misunderstanding, but that if he did do this to Laken and her family, he should face the consequences. Now, obviously what happened to Laken is terrifying, and it's something that young women everywhere should be aware of. If you would like to support her family during this time, the link will be in my bio. There is a lot of new information with what happened to Lyric Woods and Devin Clark. If you've been following, you know that on September 17th, Lyric and Devin's families woke up to find that they were missing. By Monday, their bodies were found hidden behind a bush in Orange County, and officials say that their killer repeatedly shot them as they tried to run away. Now, per new court documents, we know that around 1 a.m. that night, Lyric texted Devin and asked him to pick her up from her family's home. He was a senior from a nearby high school while she was a freshman, but the two of them were known to be good friends. Now, for some reason, Devin couldn't drive to get Lyric that night, so he asked this guy, Isaiah Ross, to drive instead. He actually didn't know Lyric and had recently dropped out of Devin's high school, but he agreed to go pick her up from the woods behind her house. Within just an hour of that, things clearly went horribly wrong. By 3 a.m. Saturday morning, a local resident reported what he described as nearly a dozen gunshots. And then again by Monday, a group of men on four-wheelers found the bodies of the two missing teens. Tragically updated autopsies report that Devin suffered 6 gunshots, with 3 to his back, 1 to his foot, 1 to the bottom of his heel, and 1 to the back of his head. As for Lyric, she was tragically hit 7 times, with 2 to her back, 2 to her arm, 1 to her hand, and 2 to her neck at close range. And just from the groupings of these shots, it was reportedly clear to police that these kids were trying to run and that they were making distance as they were shot down. Now with this, police obtained surveillance footage from the area, which quickly led them to an SUV belonging to Isaiah's mother. The teenager tried to hide out in Delaware and started releasing SoundCloud songs about murder, but after 18 days, he was arrested. His lawyer then actually missed the deadline for him to be tried as a juvenile, so police released his name and his version of events. According to Isaiah, the 3 of them were all in the car together when at some point there was a struggle for Devin's gun. This gun actually belonged to Devin's father, and we don't know why he brought it, but regardless, Isaiah says that it accidentally went off. And of course, for this to make sense, that gun would have had to go off 13 times and then chase these kids down the road. Police also have acknowledged that there was blood found inside the vehicle, but they say it wasn't enough to suggest that someone was killed inside. And they actually say that this was a cold-blooded execution and that the bodies were dragged to where they were eventually found. As of today, Isaiah Ross remains in custody, and he's really just moving from court date to court date. And on December 31st, Lyric and Devin's law finally went into action. Basically, even though Isaiah was a danger to others during his time on the run, his name legally couldn't be released. That won't be a problem anymore, and now a judge can, quote, find good cause to release the identity of a young offender. There are finally updates in the horror case of a Hawaii mom and her 8-year-old daughter. If you've been following, you know Telma was ambushed in a machete attack at Oahu vacation home. It shocked the island, and she tragically died not knowing if the young couple would kill her daughter next. Makana did survive though, and today at just 14, she has told the court everything. As the jury heard on December 7th, Telma went about the seemingly perfect arrangement she had with her daughter. She worked part-time at her school and then brought her right along to clean this vacation home on the North Shore. She of course had no idea that she was walking into a robbery. Again, according to Makana, she was waiting in the truck watching a movie when a man with green hair came up and told her, quote, "We just killed your mother." She said he then carried her into the house, followed by the girl, and they tied her to a bedpost in the master bedroom. She was left unable to scream with her mouth duct taped shut, but thankfully she never saw her mother's body. As we know, at 3:20, the new family renting the property arrived, and they actually ran away after walking into a nightmare. Police arrived shortly after that, but while Makana was still alive, Talma was in a pool of blood with a bag over her head. A machete, meat tenderizer, bat, and knives were all left behind, along with a wallet belonging to Stephen Brown. Now from here, Talma's husband Kevin was called to the scene, and it was so bad he wasn't even allowed to go inside. He was able to see his daughter though, and she had something to tell him. Right there she said, quote, "There was a guy and a girl. The girl's hair was pinkish and the guy's hair was green like Halloween." With that, Kevin managed to get his hands on a photo of the suspects, and his family offered a $100,000 reward on social media. And shortly after that, 75 people surrounded them and Talma's truck at a local Walmart. As they were being arrested, they reportedly told police to shoot them because they knew their lives were over. Now, as we know, and this wasn't easy for the family, but trials for Stephen and Haley were held separately. At Stephen's trial, he told the court how he and his girlfriend entered the property through an open window. He said that shortly after entering, Talma walked in, and it was Haley who forced her to lie down and tied her up with rope. He said he went outside to secure the perimeter, but when he came back, Talma was dead and Haley was covered in blood. The thing is, at Haley's trial, she said that none of that was true. She blamed everything on Stephen and said that she wanted to run, but he forced her to participate. She also spent a lot of time talking about how he physically abused her and she was stuck in this relationship. In the end, Stephen and Haley were both found guilty and this past month sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. And to that, Talma's husband Kevin has asked if this is a joke. He asked if his wife could get a second chance to be a mother or if his daughter could get a second chance to have one. He really just continues to reiterate that what the justice system has put them through is unacceptable. Today, Makana is still living with her father, and everything considered, she seems to be doing really great. If you would like to support this family, the link will be in my bio. Chad Daybell is finally facing the death penalty for the murders of Tylee and JJ. If you know the case, you know the siblings were last seen in Idaho in September of 2019. The thing is, no one knew they were missing for nearly 3 months. Their mom, Lori, has since been convicted of their murder, and today her 5th husband, Chad, is on trial. Now, going back to February of that year, we know that Lori's 4th husband, Charles, filed for a divorce. She had become obsessed with Chad Daybell's doomsday books, and with that, started acting really strange. She became romantically involved with the author that spring, and genuinely thought they were the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, as we know, Charles then tried to tell police that he was scared for he and the kids' safety, but by midsummer, he was dead. On July 11th, so about 2 months before the kids went missing, he went by Lori's new place in Chandler to pick up JJ for school. As soon as he got there, he was shot to death by her brother, or the kids' Uncle Alex. Unbelievably, it was initially ruled to be in self-defense. This is actually a photo of Lori just after her husband was shot, and this is a screenshot of the message she sent, breaking the news to his sons from a previous marriage. Now, following Charles's death, we know that Lori moved herself, the kids, and Uncle Alex to Idaho to be closer to Chad Daybell. Again, the kids were publicly last seen there that September, but no one knew they were missing. No one knew that the couple had determined them to be zombies, or that they were buried in Chad's backyard. Now, with the kids unknowingly gone, October came, and Chad's wife Tammy suddenly died in her sleep. It reportedly appeared to be natural, and therefore, he and their 5 kids decided not to perform an autopsy. Tammy was buried with no one knowing that she was actually asphyxiated, and then Chad and Lori fled off to Hawaii together. They got married on November 6th, and it was 3 weeks after that when JJ's grandparents realized no one had seen the kids. Now again, as we know, in February of 2020, Lori was finally arrested for failing to produce her children. And then, after another 4 months, police finally ascended on Chad's property and discovered human remains. They reportedly first found JJ, who was buried with a plastic covering over his head and still wearing his pajamas. Then they found Tylee, who was dismembered and burned to the point that investigators didn't think it could be a body. It was reportedly clear that Chad, Lori, and Uncle Alex were all involved. Now from here, Chad and Lori were obviously charged with murder, and more came to light about why they did this. It naturally doesn't make sense, but they reportedly believed that they were chosen to save the world, and that they had to kill these kids because they had evil spirits. Of course, on the other side, there's the belief that it was all just a scheme to be together and obtain benefits from life insurance. In May of 2023, Lori Vallow was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Again, now Chad is on trial, and it's supposed to go on for the next 9 weeks. If Uncle Alex were still here, I'm sure he would have a trial too, but he has also since suspiciously died. It is actually kind of crazy just how many deaths Lori Vallow is linked to. There's Tylee, JJ, Charles, Tammy, and Alex, but then there's also Joseph and Stacy. Future charges are expected, and I will keep you guys updated with the trial.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Leo and Roxy's father could not go to prison because he doesn't realize that he killed them. If you know the case, you know Matthew killed his 2-year-old and his 10-month-old because he believed his wife gave them serpent DNA. He's actually already admitted to repeatedly shooting them with a spearfishing gun, but today he, quote, still does not comprehend that they are dead. Now, according to officials, on August 7th, the Colemans were all out on their driveway, packing for a family camping trip. Without saying anything, Matthew reportedly grabbed their kids, put them in their van, and drove off. Now, with that, his wife Abby immediately called 911, knowing that he didn't have a car seat for their baby. But she initially told the responding officer that she didn't think her husband would do anything, and that they would all eventually return. You can see the officer still tried to call her back and offered to come see her in person, but she declined any further assistance. Now, come the next day on August 8th, Abby seemingly changed her mind and became really worried for her family. She called police back that night to report them all missing, and so officers were sent to their house right away. They then asked to see her laptop, and right there on the Find My iPhone app, it showed that Matthew had taken the kids into Mexico. Now, as we know, police wouldn't take any action that night, with the belief still being that there wasn't any imminent danger. They contacted Border Police the next day to be on the lookout, but by that point, they were actually too late. As confirmed by surveillance footage, at 2:54 a.m., Matthew was seen leaving a Rosarito hotel with his kids and his packed bags. And then at 3:12 a.m., he texted Abby that he was finally getting some clarity. Tragically, investigators believe that it was at this point when he drove the kids to a remote ranch and shot them with a spearfishing gun. He then hid their bodies in some brush and disposed of the bloody clothing, but of course back at home, no one knew. When Abby woke up that morning, she got Matthew's message about clarity, and at 9:30 a.m., she responded with this, quote, "We are doing this together, babe. Everything you believed and know to be true is happening right now. I'm partnering with you from Santa Barbara. Let's take back our city." It's incredibly bizarre, but regardless, it was also around this time when police saw that Matthew's phone was headed back to the US border. They went to meet him there around 1 p.m., and to everyone's horror, he was alone. Again, as we know, Matthew was arrested right there, as local police would reveal that they'd found the bodies of the two children. The father was interviewed that same day, and to say the least, he had quite the story. According to Matthew, he and Abby began researching conspiracy theories together, and were even texting each other satanic memes. But for him, it reportedly grew much stronger, to the point where it infiltrated his entire life. Again, he reportedly genuinely believed that they had the DNA of serpents, and that they would turn into monsters. This past October, Matthew was ruled incompetent to stand trial, because he again doesn't understand that his kids are dead. That being said, he's also written several letters where he's being held, where he begs for forgiveness for what he's done. He's even written, quote, "I know that reptile DNA thing was a delusion in my own mind. I made myself believe something that wasn't there." As of today, Matthew will remain under treatment in an effort to restore his mental health. And as for Abby Coleman, police say they will continue to treat her as a victim and work to get justice for her kids. New details have come out with Hannah Clark and why her husband burned their family alive. If you know the case, you know Rowan publicly doused his wife and 3 kids in gasoline, and then he lit the match. He threatened the bystanders who tried to save them with a knife, but Hannah still managed to escape the fire and tell police what happened before she died. That morning, Hannah woke up the kids at her parents' house in Camp Hill, but as she was loading them into the car for school, Rowan reportedly just showed up on the driveway. And this was a problem, because she had moved there specifically to get away from him. The couple met back when she was 19, and he was a 31-year-old married father, and since then, he'd quite literally made her life a living hell. As we know, Rowan went on to force his way into Hannah's SUV, carrying a can of petrol he had just purchased at a service station. She screamed at him to get out, but even with their 6, 4, and 3-year-olds in the back seats, he still demanded that she start driving. With that, we know that Hannah did start to follow Rowan's directions, but then in one last effort to get help, she made a turn down a residential neighborhood. She rolled down her window and started screaming for neighbors to call police, because like she had tried to tell everyone, her husband was going to kill her. Tragically, investigators believe that she was his only intended victim, but because she wasn't cooperating, it was at this point that Rowan switched to his plan B. In a matter of seconds, neighbors heard what sounded like a bomb going off, and the vehicle exploded with everyone inside. Hannah managed to get out completely engulfed in flames, but as a bystander hosed her down, there was only one thing on her mind. She started mumbling something about how her kids were still in the car, and she couldn't save them. After realizing there were children, obviously more people tried to get into this burning vehicle, but there was nothing they could do. Even if it weren't for the heat and the flames, Rowan had also gotten out of the car, and he was guarding it and threatening anyone who came close with a knife. From here, and in front of what had become a crowd of local residents, Rowan fatally stabbed himself in the chest. He made sure his kids died with him, which again, didn't seem to be a part of his initial plan. There was actually a note found on his phone written to Hannah, in part reading, quote, "I can't take it anymore, I'm finishing your game. Do you know how hard it is to go to bed without your children? I wish you would have just tried. I've told the kids you loved them. We will all miss you." The letter ultimately blamed Hannah for everything, and the evidence at the scene suggested he intended to tie her up, burn her, and then take off with the kids. Again, this likely changed when she stopped cooperating. By the time paramedics got to the scene that day, they found Hannah with burns to 97% of her body, and they could tell she also wasn't going to make it. They figured all they could do was make her comfortable, but unbelievably, she wanted to give a statement. Before Hannah passed that afternoon, she told police about how she had filed protection orders to get Rowan away from she and her kids. Court documents list hundreds of incidents that clearly show this wasn't mental illness, but rather narcissism and a complete need for control. As we know, some of Hannah's last words were, quote, "I hope Rowan survives and I hope he rots in prison for the rest of his life." But of course, no one in the family survived this awful day. In Hannah's case, even doing everything wasn't enough, and she couldn't give her daughters the life she planned for them. With so many warning signs and failed attempts at protection orders, this is a case that everyone should be aware of. For those wanting more information, I'm going to link the incident reports from this case and the link to Hannah's foundation in my bio. This 13-year-old girl survived an abduction that was nothing short of a nightmare. In 8th grade, Jamie always walked to her bus stop, and October 15th was no different. She couldn't have known that she'd caught the eye of this 21-year-old on his way to work, or that he decided right there that she would be the one he would take. Over the next few days, Jake would watch Jamie and her parents, but to him, it was never the right time. The lights were always on, or there were other people at their house, up until that Monday night. Around 1 a.m., Jake would drive back over to the Clauses with 2 pairs of gloves, his head shaved, and the safety latch removed from his trunk. Meanwhile, Jamie was up late that night when she saw a car with no headlights pull into their driveway. She immediately woke up her dad, and then she saw him for the last time go downstairs to see who it was. Now, the next thing Jamie knew, there was screaming and a single gunshot. She and her mom actually booked it downstairs, and they barricaded themselves in the bathroom. They were huddled together in the tub and on the phone with the 911 operator as Jake worked to break down the door. Now, as we know, that door did eventually break, and Jake came in and ripped down the shower curtain. He then reportedly tied Jamie up, pulled her next to him, and horribly shot her mom in the head. From here, Jamie was dragged through her front yard and put in the trunk of Jake's car. They actually drove by all of the police responding to their 911 call, and as you can see, Jake even yielded for them to pass. The pair obviously wasn't stopped, and when police got to the house, they walked into the confusing scene. That same night, officials would determine that they had a double homicide and a missing girl. But there was quite literally no indication of who did this, or what had happened to Jamie. The killer had somehow left behind 0 DNA, and police couldn't find any prints or tire tracks whatsoever. Now, with no leads, online sleuths began questioning Jamie, but police always knew that she wasn't responsible. They also reportedly did everything they could in the following months, but they had no idea that she was here. 88 days later, on January 10th, a woman walking her dog some 70 miles away saw a teenager in the middle of the road. She wasn't dressed for the snow, and before this woman could say anything to her, she said, quote, "Help me, I am Jamie Kloss." Now, of course, this woman knew Jamie from the news and quickly gathered that she had come running from this house next door. They ended up running together to a neighbor's further down the street, and there they all waited for Jamie to finally be rescued. The owner of this residence even guarded Jamie and the house with a gun, just in case her abductor came looking. Now that day, as police took Jamie to the hospital, they eerily passed another car in the neighborhood. It was Jake out looking for her after noticing that she'd escaped his house while he was out. This time, police pulled him over, and he told officers, quote, "I did it." With Jake in custody, Jamie went on to tell her story and those 3 months of her life. Jake spoke too, saying that he always had bad thoughts, and again, that he never even met her. He told police he actually thought he would get caught right away, and that when he didn't, he figured he and Jamie could live a life together. He also said that he kept her under his bed for hours at a time, screamed at her, and on one occasion, hit her really hard. In the end, Jake pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 life terms for the murders, plus an additional 40 years for the kidnapping. But more importantly, Jamie went on to receive the Hometown Hero Award for her incredible bravery. Her parents are remembered as wonderful people, and she lives with her maternal aunt now as a true survivor. New details are coming out with Denise Huskins and what has been called the real-life Gone Girl case. If you know the case, you know Denise became victim to an abduction that nobody believed. Her boyfriend tried to tell police that she was taken by scuba divers in the middle of the night, but with that, he was accused of her murder. We now know that around 3 a.m. on March 15th, the couple really was awoken to flashing lights and red laser dots crossing the walls. They reportedly heard people talking and at first thought it was a dream, but then the words became clear. "Wake up, this is a robbery." From here, a man wearing a full-body wetsuit threatened Denise and Aaron with what appeared to be a real gun. Denise was forced to tie her boyfriend up with zip ties, and then he had blacked-out swim goggles placed over his eyes and a pair of headphones over his ears. These headphones reportedly played a message that, quote, addressed Aaron by name and warned him that this was a professional group who was there to collect financial debts, that they would drug him and abduct his ex-fiancée with cameras and perimeters set around the house to restrict him from calling police. Now the thing is, these recordings didn't name Denise. Again, they named Aaron's ex-fiancé. And at some point during this entire ordeal, the intruder reportedly asked Aaron if Denise looked like her. Aaron sighed and admitted they both had long blonde hair and that his fiancé had moved out just a few months ago. So with that, it became clear that Aaron's ex was the target that night, but regardless, the intruder took Denise instead. And as for Aaron, he had his vitals taken before being drugged. He was left tied up on the living room couch, but also with a fresh change of clothes and pair of scissors to cut himself free. When Aaron did wake up in the morning, he found that both Denise and her car were missing, and that he had 2 new emails asking for $15,000. There also really were cameras and perimeters set around the house, so being terrified, it wasn't until almost 2 p.m. when he contacted police. As we know, when authorities got to the house that afternoon, they heard Aaron's story and immediately asked if he was on drugs. And to that, Aaron told them that he was, because the intruders had drugged him. He tried to show them the evidence of what had happened, but the odds were stacked against him. His girlfriend was missing, her car was missing, and he had her cell phone. There was also an ex-fiancé in the picture, and again, an absolutely insane story. Now, over the next 2 days after the attack, letters were sent to local news outlets claiming that Denise would be returned home soon. And then, that is exactly what happened. Denise was dropped off hours away and right outside of her parents' house in Huntington Beach. With Denise's return, she confirmed everything that Aaron had said and explained that she had been held captive in a quiet house for the past 2 days. But to the police, none of this made any sense. They publicly stated that it was all a hoax and that it was the couple who owed the community an apology. From here, Denise's abductor began writing more letters to the press, both showing proof of the kidnapping and demanding that police apologize for not believing her. Still, nothing would change until 2 months later, when a man named Matthew Mueller left his phone at the scene of yet another home invasion. When police executed a search warrant at Matthew's house, they found tons of physical evidence relating to Aaron and Quinn's case. He actually immediately confessed and blamed his mental illness for everything, but to this day, we really don't know if he had accomplices or why he targeted Aaron's ex. Just that he used to be in the Marines and both studied and taught at Harvard University. He was ultimately sentenced to 40 years in prison for the crime. And as for the couple, Quinn ended up proposing, and they've since gotten married and had their 2 daughters. They've also been awarded $2.5 million and received somewhat of an apology from police. Not sponsored, but Netflix is coming out with a new series on this case on Wednesday.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
In one of the most terrifying cases, there was a 7-hour home invasion and just one survivor. The Pettit family was known to live the perfect life in Cheshire, Connecticut, up until July 22nd, when they became random targets. That night, around 7 p.m., Michaela was so excited to make pasta for her family, so her mom took her to Stop and Shop to pick up the ingredients. Neither of them could have known that while they were there, they had caught the attention of someone else. Reportedly drawn by the 11-year-old and the looks of the family's wealth, Joshua Komisarjevsky would go on to follow the pair in the store, and then the 3 miles back home. The family would go about their usual Sunday night watching movies together, again completely unaware that he was sitting outside, making a plan with his friend Steven. They'd sneak into the house, tie the family up, steal some cash or maybe some jewelry, and then finally make a getaway that would, quote, leave everyone unharmed. As we know, at 3 a.m., Steven broke in through the basement cellar, and he was supposed to go upstairs and let Joshua in through the front door. But as Joshua waited outside, he could see through the living room window that things were already going wrong. Mr. Pettit had apparently fallen asleep on the living room couch, and Steven was just beating him in the head with a baseball bat. With that, Joshua too entered through the cellar, and he and Steven agreed. They would need to keep the girls and their mom away from Mr. Pettit so that they wouldn't panic over the blood. They decided to tie him to a pole in the basement, and then they headed up to the 2nd floor. Michaela had actually fallen asleep in her mom's room reading Harry Potter, so they, quote, gently woke the pair from their sleep and reiterated that they were only there for money. From here, Michaela, Haley, and Jennifer were all tied to their respective beds, while Joshua and Steven began ransacking the house for valuables. They actually didn't find anything expensive like they thought, but they did find Jennifer's checkbook, indicating that she had $30,000. After seeing this, they reportedly came up with a whole new plan. When morning came, Jennifer tried to offer the assailants breakfast, but Steven took her to the bank to withdraw the money. She obviously had a really difficult decision to make when she got to the teller, but she calmly explained that her family was being held hostage, and if she didn't come back with this, they would all be killed. She didn't even have her ID, but the teller still gave her $15,000 in cash and then immediately contacted police. Now, unbelievably, before Jennifer and Steven even got back to the house, officers had already driven by and determined that nothing seemed out of place. They actually watched the pair go back inside from where they were parked down the street, but they were instructed not to interfere. The lieutenant also told the hostage negotiator not to come, as it, quote, was believed that Jennifer could be involved somehow. As we know, Joshua and Steven ended up seeing the officers outside, and they became filled with rage thinking Jennifer had called them there. What happened next is actually up for debate, because the guys blame each other. Regardless, Jennifer was strangled to death, and her daughters were assaulted and left tied to their beds. Now again, from here, and with police still outside, the guys reportedly went downstairs to get what they would need to start a fire. They expected to find Mr. Pettit still tied to that pole in the basement, but he had just heard his wife being killed and had gotten a rush of adrenaline. At this point, he was rolling through the lawn towards his neighbor's house with his legs still bound. Now, tragically, as soon as Mr. Pettit made it over to his neighbors, officers began to see and smell smoke. Somehow, Steven and Joshua initially forgot to grab the $15,000, and they ended up backing the family's SUV into a police car that had been waiting at the end of the driveway. In the end, police couldn't get to Haley or Michaela in time, and they tragically died from a combination of the fire and the smoke. Even worse, Haley managed to break through her restraints, but then she collapsed at the top of the stairs. With Stephen and Joshua in custody, they both blamed each other, and Stephen told police he was having nightmares about his own children dying in a fire. Their trials were held separately, but while they were both sentenced to death, the death penalty was then abolished in Connecticut in 2012. And they have since both been resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.